I used to think I had the kind of love people only dreamed about, the kind that made every sacrifice worth it. When I first met him, he wasn't just a billionaire, he was a man who made me feel seen. He'd show up at the little cafe where I worked, dressed in his expensive suits but somehow never out of place. He'd listen when I talked, laugh at my stories, and look at me like I was the only person in the world. And maybe that was my first mistake, believing that kind of attention could ever be real forever. He said he loved my drive, my independence, the way I never asked for anything. He called me his real world, said I kept him grounded. Back then, I believed him. Our wedding was the kind of fairy tale people scroll past on social media and sigh over. Roses, champagne, promises whispered under golden lights. I remember thinking that I had done it. I had crossed the invisible line between surviving and finally being safe. I thought love had rescued me. But the thing about fairy tales is that they don't tell you what happens after the I do. I started noticing the looks first, the way his family's smiles never reached their eyes, the awkward pauses when I walked into a room full of his friends, the questions that weren't really questions. So, where did you two meet again? Or, isn't it lovely how life gives people opportunities? He'd laugh them off, squeeze my hand under the table, and tell me not to take it personally. And for a while I didn't. I wanted so badly to fit into his world that I convinced myself those moments didn't mean anything. But over time, the man who once told me I was his equal started treating me like a decoration. He'd talk over me in conversations, make little jokes about my simple roots, and every time he did, I'd shrink a little more. I told myself he was just stressed, that love sometimes changed under pressure. What I didn't realize then was that love doesn't change. It reveals, and what his love revealed was control. By the time I saw the truth, it was too late. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was his possession, and I had no idea just how perfectly built the lie around me really was. Control doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes dressed in silk and smiles. At first, it was small things, him insisting he'd handle our finances because I was too busy to worry about it, or gently suggesting I wear certain colors that looked better in photos beside him. It sounded harmless, thoughtful even. I told myself it was just his way of caring. But soon, I wasn't making choices anymore. He was. He started deciding where we went, who we saw, even what I said. If I disagreed, he'd make it sound like I was overreacting. "You always think the worst," he'd say with that calm, measured tone that made me feel crazy for even questioning him. And when I did push back, he'd pull me close, kiss my forehead and whisper, "Don't ruin a good thing, baby." That's how manipulation works. It doesn't take your freedom all at once. It makes you hand it over piece by piece until one day you realize your voice doesn't belong to you anymore. I remember the night I overheard him on the phone. I was coming down the hall, and his voice carried through the slightly open door of his office. He was laughing, a sharp, cruel laugh I'd never heard before. "Oh, please," he said. "You really think this marriage means anything? She looks good on paper, that's all. Investors love the diversity story." My heart stopped. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to burst into the room, scream at him, ask him how he could say that, but instead I stood there, frozen, listening to the man I loved tear our life apart with every word. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, pretending to sleep while his hand rested over mine. I wondered how many times he'd lied straight to my face. I thought about the charity events, the cameras, the way he'd smile and call me his queen in public, only to mock me behind closed doors. That was the moment something inside me cracked. He thought he'd broken me, but what he really did was wake me up. I stopped crying. I stopped asking why. And I started remembering who I was before his money, before the mansion, before the lies. That's the night I decided he would never control me again. The morning after I heard him on that call, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My reflection looked calm, but inside, I was burning. I wasn't going to beg him to love me anymore. I was done trying to fix something that was already broken. That's when the plan began to take shape. Quietly, carefully, like a seed growing in the dark. I started with information. Every document, every bank statement, every contract that had my name buried under his. I studied it all. I remembered the password he once bragged about never forgetting. It took me less than a week to unlock everything he thought I'd never see. That's how I found out he'd been shifting assets into offshore accounts, signing deals under shell companies, and using my name as a front for some of his more creative tax moves. My anger turned into focus. I wasn't just leaving him. I was going to make sure he couldn't use me again. I contacted a lawyer, a woman I met at a charity event months ago. She had this way of listening without judgment, her expression never changing even when I told her everything. "You've got more power than you think," she said. "You just need to use it." Together, we built a quiet empire, one document at a time. She helped me transfer what was mine back into my control and gather evidence of everything he'd done. While he was busy parading me around at business galas, I was setting up a new life under a different name, a bank account, a property in my name, even a small consulting business he didn't know existed. He had no idea that every time he boasted about being untouchable, I was one step closer to proving him wrong. But what fueled me the most wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I realized he'd never truly loved me. He loved the story I represented. A woman from nothing who made him look good. I decided that story was mine now, and I would rewrite it. Every smile I gave him after that was rehearsed. Every "I love you" was strategy. I played my role perfectly while he bragged to his board about his perfect wife. He didn't notice that I stopped reacting when he insulted me. He didn't realize I'd already emotionally checked out. By the time the plan was complete, I had everything I needed: legal proof, financial control, and the courage to walk away. All that was left was the right moment, the one where he'd be too sure of himself, too loud, too cruel to see what was coming. And when that moment came, I promised myself I'd make sure his laughter would be the last sound before everything he built came crashing down. The night of the dinner, everything shimmered with perfection, at least on the surface. The ballroom was drenched in gold light, chandeliers glittering above a sea of polished silverware and expensive smiles. He loved nights like this, nights where he could perform, where the world would look at him and see success, power, and charm. And tonight, he wanted everyone to see me too, not as his wife, but as his prop. I'd spent the entire day rehearsing my calm. My hands didn't shake when I zipped up my black silk gown, though inside, I could feel my pulse humming like a secret drum. I told myself just a few more hours. When he walked in to fetch me, he looked at me with that same smug pride he always wore in public. "You look perfect," he said. I smiled. "So do you," I whispered, though in my mind I added, "for a man standing on the edge of his own ruin." At the dinner, the air was thick with laughter, perfume, and lies. Investors, socialites, journalists, all of them raising glasses to toast a man they thought was untouchable. He thrived under their attention, every sentence crafted to make him sound brilliant. Then, as if it were part of a routine he'd practiced, he decided to turn his charm into cruelty. He began telling a story, one about us, but his version wasn't love, it was mockery. "She thought I proposed because I was in love," he laughed, swirling his glass of wine. "Truth is, she was my good luck charm. Every deal I closed after marrying her tripled my net worth. Guess I should have married her sooner, huh?" The table erupted in laughter. My chest burned. Their eyes turned to me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I smiled. Not the fake kind I'd used for years, but the calm, dangerous smile of a woman who already knew how the story ended. I reached for my clutch, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and placed it on the table beside his wine glass. He glanced down, confused, still smirking. "What's this?" he asked. "Your reality check," I said softly. "Divorce papers." "And attached, legal filings transferring the controlling shares of your company." You won't be the majority owner by sunrise. For a second, silence swallowed the room. The laughter died mid-breath. Someone dropped a fork. His face drained of color as he fumbled for words. You can't. I already did. I cut in. My voice didn't tremble. While you were too busy pretending to own me, I learned how to own myself. He stood there, frozen, the crowd watching the king lose his crown in real time. I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and smiled one last time. Enjoy your dinner, I said, turning to leave. It's the last one you'll ever host in my name. And as I walked out of that glittering room, I didn't feel anger or fear, just freedom. Behind me, the empire began to crumble. The morning after the dinner, I woke up in silence. No shouting, no footsteps pacing the marble floor, no voice calling my name like an order. Just peace. It was strange at first, too calm, too empty, but it felt like breathing for the first time after years underwater. I made myself coffee in my small apartment, not the mansion's gourmet kitchen, and it tasted better than anything money had ever bought me. Freedom always does. By noon, his downfall was everywhere. News outlets ran headlines about the collapse of a power couple. Reporters camped outside his estate, waiting for a statement he wasn't ready to give. The company board called an emergency meeting, and within hours, he was out. The same people who'd once bowed at his every word were now turning their backs. Power has a short memory when it senses weakness. My lawyer called, her voice steady and proud. It's done, she said. Everything is transferred. He can't touch you now. I thanked her, but what I really wanted to say was that she'd given me something bigger than financial security. She'd given me myself back. I spent the next few days quietly finalizing what I'd built in the shadows, a foundation for women who'd been silenced, controlled, or manipulated the way I once was. I named it the Phoenix Fund, because rising from ashes felt like the only honest metaphor left. He tried to contact me, of course. Calls, messages, letters that smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. He said he'd been drunk that night, that he didn't mean the things he said, that he'd fix it. But I'd learned something vital. Some men don't want forgiveness. They want access, and I wasn't giving him either. I blocked his number and changed my address. The woman who used to tremble at the sound of his voice now slept soundly, knowing his power over her was gone. A week later, I stood in front of a group of women in a small community center, telling my story. Not the glamorous version, but the truth. I watched their faces soften, their eyes widen, some fill with tears. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel shame. I felt strength. You can survive it, I told them. You can rebuild. You can win quietly. The irony was poetic. The man who thought he made me had become the proof that I could make myself. His empire crumbled because it was built on arrogance, but mine, my peace, my purpose, was built on truth. Sometimes people ask me if I miss him. I tell them I don't. What I miss is the woman I was before him, the one who believed love could save her. But I've stopped chasing that version of myself, because the woman I became afterward, the one who walked away, who reclaimed her life, she's stronger, wiser, and finally free. It's been months since that night, and sometimes I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting his shadow to reappear. But it never does. The silence that once felt lonely now feels sacred. I built a new home, smaller, quieter, filled with laughter that's real. I still wake up early, make my own coffee, and remind myself that peace doesn't need luxury to feel beautiful. I've learned that power isn't about money or control. It's about choice. The choice to walk away. The choice to heal. The choice to start again. I no longer define myself by the man I stood beside, but by the woman who learned to stand alone. He lost everything trying to make me feel small, but I gained everything by remembering who I was. And that's the irony of it all. His empire fell, but I rose higher than he ever imagined. If my story taught me anything, it's this. You don't need revenge to win. You just need the strength to leave, the courage to rebuild, and the grace to never look back. Because sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is the door closing behind you.